Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dominic Hardy. I'm the Assistant for Public Programs here at the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts. And on behalf of the Education Department and the museum, I'm delighted to welcome you this Thursday afternoon. It looked like the first day of summer this earlier on, but I'm not too sure anymore. But we're all here for a wonderful series that we're delighted to host. For the second year in a row now, we have the honor of presenting this series of 6 talks given by Dr. François-Marc Gagnon. As you know, he's the director and first chair of the Gail and Stephen A. Jaroslawski Institute for Studies in Canadian Art at Concordia University. Before we begin, we'd like at the museum to express our profound gratitude to the Institute and to Rosemary Joly of the Institute and to Dr. Lawren Lerner, who's chair of the Art History Department at Concordia, for the very precious collaboration that we have, which makes it possible for us to welcome a series such as this, and all of you for an occasion such as this. I know we want to get right into the talk, but I have a few short remarks I'd like to offer. To consider the career of François-Marc Gagnon is to consider a great part of the very field of Canadian and Quebec art history studies. From the 1960s onwards, Dr. Gagnon's research projects, his involvement with countless publications, monographs and articles, exhibitions, and his teaching have harnessed a wide range of interests from the earliest arts of Canada right through to contemporary practice. We find studies in the imagery of Jacques Cartier alongside the origins of art in New France, Cornelius Krieghoff, of course, Paul-Émile Bourdieu, of whom he is the specialist, and the whole generation of automatiste painters and current practitioners. His work reaches a wide audience, general and academic, who are invited to think with him not only about what has taken place in the history of art in Canada, but also about what we need to consider in order to understand that history of art better. Perhaps this is a great part of the very flame that he's shared with generations of students and with us today. In upcoming projects, his is a key part of the writing that is being assembled for the catalogue of our upcoming exhibition devoted to the late Jean-Paul Riopel, which will be beginning on June 20th. This will be a return to a subject he's explored in other venues over the last decade and more, helping us to rethink Riopel in relation to contemporary art and also in relation to the wider phenomenon of art in North America. And it's this rethinking which seems to be so important. In his 1998 work, The Chronique du Mouvement Automatiste au Québec, Dr. Gagnon quoted the historian François Furet, and I'm just translating informally, "The right question, a problem well set, are far more important and far rarer than the facility of establishing any number of little known and marginal facts." And that's the very adventure we join on with François-Marc Gagnon today, to come to the right questions, the well-understood problem. We begin a path of inquiry around 2 or 3 generations of artists who have also asked some of the most important questions about landscape and abstraction in Canada. Over the next 6 weeks, as we understand and encounter Lauren Harris, Marion Scott, Bourdieu, Riopel, Fernand Leduc, and the plasticiens, we'll have the pleasure of asking these questions together in the company of François-Marc Gagnon, who I ask you to welcome warmly.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to be here. At least it's warm. There's no rain. And I will want to give you first, let's say, a few words of introduction, general introduction to my topic, and to present what I can call, maybe at this stage only, an hypothesis to work with. You will see the painter where we will deal with were very often figurative painter to start with. And the problem I had then, it was how to explain that at a certain point of their career, they decided to become abstractionist or non-objective. And one hypothesis I want to brush out at the beginning, it is that they just wanted to follow fashion, for instance. And I say that because very serious painter, in particular, have this hypothesis in mind. And I'm thinking of John Lyman, for instance. Lyman never liked too much abstractionist. He was quite direct on this subject in his own diary. You know that he kept a diary all his life, which is a very incredible document in a way in terms of Canadianism, if you want. It's written both in English and French, in perfect English, of course, and perfect French too. And this man doesn't make mistake. You know, his wife was French-Canadian, but nevertheless, he wrote like this very freely on both language. And time to time, he expressed his deep feelings about what he thinks the painting should be or things. And I just quote you a little passage just to say that I want to distinguish myself from that. He says, "What nonpluses many people in my work is that they don't know where to place it, and consequently what to think about it, since it doesn't conform to any of the fashionable pattern of abstraction, non-objectivism, or neo-primitivism, archaism in bracket, which constitute the general connotation of modern. So they think it must be academic until they realize it resembles the academy of the right as little as that of the left. So what the hell is it?" And what he means by, I think, the academic of the right and the left, we could guess a little bit what it is. The academism, because at the time also you have to know that the position was done all the time. This is written in 1952, between what we used to call in French milieu l'art vivant, in terms of, let's say, modern art, it would be a good translation for that, et l'art académique, the academic art. Normally, academic art is art teach in academy, but it's also a certain style. It is a style where realism to the utmost is looked for, where naturalism is the thing to do, where you have to make almost a photography of what we are representing. So indeed, the painting of Lyman doesn't look like this. It's much more freer, closer to Matisse, if you want, or to the Fauve. And what he called the Academy of the Left, it is the opposite. It is the so-called very fashionable artists who follow all the trends and are abstractionists when is the time and things like that. And he says that, of course, his painting doesn't look like either. But I think it's unjust to say that everybody who, at a certain point in his life, felt the need to paint abstractly is just following fashion. And of course, it's unjust also to depict the Lyman picture as only academic one or as non-modern one. The hypothesis I want to explore with you to explain this kind of change in felt like an inner needs and not only like a way to be fashionable is the following. I think there is a relation between a certain detachment or certain estrangement from the place and abstract art. When you become to define too close relationship with you and a specific region or a specific place in which you are familiar with everything, then you could say it's more natural in a way to paint more figuratively, but to be to try this kind of art, will be called abstract, you have suddenly to take distance with that. You have to detach yourself from the place, understood in a very general way. Let's say it could be the place where you are born, it could be your country, it could be your region, it could be your familiar, anything familiar in your surrounding. This more or less the concept I want to work with. And I explored it a little bit, maybe some of you were with me last year. I explored it a little bit of that about Jean-Paul Lemieux last year. Because Lemieux, of course, didn't make the jump toward abstraction. And in the contrary, he insisted very much on the importance of a place, on a region, or well, let's say on the landscape of Quebec, even as very, very simplified as he represented it. Nevertheless, this was a thing that he could not just let go. He was attached to that. And I refer at the time to a French contemporary philosopher who discuss a little bit this idea, which is called Emmanuel Levinas. It's written L-E-V-I-N-A-S, Levinas, who felt, let's say, what I would say, the danger of this attachment to a place. The context in philosophy is the following. He is against the definition that Martin Heidegger gave of what Heidegger called the Dasein. The Dasein is the human reality, if you want. And Heidegger wanted to define man basically by his relation to a world. The Dasein is that. It is the da means there, and sein means be, to be. So to be there, this is the first definition of man. But if you put all the meaning of your existence in the fact that you belong to a certain place and to a certain region, then there is a certain difficulty to that of which, about which, let's say, Levinas was very sensitive. If you define your existence and the meaning of your existence only by the fact that you are in a place, what you do of people who are displaced, what you do of people who are not citizens but denizens of the world, if you want, who are refugees, who are no more related to a place and all that. And of course, this is a condition of more and more people in our world. We live it all the time, these displaced persons all over the place. And coming in a new country, let's say, but not wanting really to identify to the new country completely, and not also being too nostalgic of what they left, because what they left very often is too horrible to go back to. So you have a lot of these situations for which Levinas was more sensitive than Heidegger, I would say. And he says, okay, what you do with this? If you define your relation only because you are in a region, in a place where all your existence take meaning, what you do when this is over or is not felt anymore, is it not then that your life have no meaning at all? And why it should be like this? Heidegger illustrated his point with a comment on this famous painting by Van Gogh. It seems that we are supposed to say Van Gogh or something, but I will not go too far. It's called A Pair of Boots, and indeed the title seems to be clear. It describes only two boots of people. And in the context when Heidegger speaks of this painting in particular, he is trying to distinguish between what he calls a thing, a product, and a work of art. So, of course, shoes are things, like anything here around me, this microphone, everything. These are things. But more, it's a product also, because it's not only a thing, but it's something to have been done, have been fabricated. But what it will make, that it will suddenly be a work of art. Like a representation of boots will not be just a representation of a product, but will be also a work of art. So what Heidegger suggests then, it has to be in a certain way symbolical or allegorical in the very primitive sense of the word. In Greek, allegorical, gorein, means to speak about something, to speak about something else. And in meaning that these shoes should tell us something about the world of the people who wear them. And Heidegger is convinced that these are shoes of a peasant woman, and he described from there the world of this peasant woman, and he says it's fantastic if Van Gogh succeed to suggest this idea of toils and the difficulty of suffering and the relation to the hurt and this very kind of limited world, if you want, that the peasant have, but it is her world, and it's there where his life take meaning and everything. So you see how it can use this to illustrate this idea of the Dasein defined as being in the world. But in the world, understood in a very kind of limited way, in this peasant world, in this peasant woman world. There's endless discussion about this painting among philosophers. I don't know why they like so much boots, but it's a fact. You have Mayer Shapiro, who is an art historian, who makes an interesting remark. He says in 1886, when this painting was painted, Van Gogh was no more in the country. He was living in a city, and it's probably his shoes that he's representing, and not one of a peasant one. And you know, Jacques Derrida also in his book, it's called La vérité en peinture, in French, but it's truth in painting, let's say in English. I have a whole chapter about this, discussing both Heidegger and another point of view on this. It's very complicated, so I don't want to enter too much in this, but nevertheless, okay, you understand the idea that this painting could symbolize, in a way, the relation of the peasant to his world. And second point that is important also to understand, this for Heidegger, what threatened this world of the peasant is technique. It's the invasion of technique, of the transformation of the land into, for instance, industrial agriculture, in which machine will take over, and in which, of course, the world of the peasant will be suddenly reduced only to resources, or if you want, energy. And if you extend this to endlessly, in a way, you could say, well, the whole earth will be finally natural resources and will be transformed in energy and will, of course, disappear. Up to this technique seems to be unstoppable, will go endlessly up to the final destruction of our environment. And indeed, in that sense, Heidegger was a philosopher well considered by ecologists, by the ecologist movement, because he felt that the danger of the technique. Then I go back to Levinas and to abstract painting. You will see, Levinas says, "I'm not so sure that technique is so evil, like you say, because technique, after all, free us from the place, from the obsession and the superstition of the place." And he gave an example, because the text was written about that time, I think in the early 60s. He gave an example for him who is absolutely fantastic, who implied technique and implied also a complete separation, a complete dissevering from any concept of place. He says it is the experience of Gagarin. Why? Gagarin in space, yeah. Is this the first experience that an astronaut have to walk in space? And he says, this was fantastic. For once, there was a man who had no horizon whatsoever. He was in pure space, space above him, under him, left, right, endlessly. He was freed from the superstition of the place. Of course, he didn't do it too long. I guess you want to go back right away in the place and to be safe on Earth after. But at least as an experience, it will be fantastic. And for me, this experience could be illustrated as the best by the most abstract type of painting. Like, for instance, this Malevich picture, which calls only suprematist painting, so meaning that Malevich didn't want to give him a specific title, in which you could say the two squares there are like this astronaut in the middle of nowhere, and the white background is like this infinite space in which he is. It could be continue, I would say, to the left, to the right, on the top, on the right. There's no limit to this white space in which these two objects are there. So, if I go back to the hypothesis that I was suggesting, so that to have abstract art, to have a certain distance taken from this concept of place and the concept of space, world, all these concepts are quite close together. I would say, maybe to clarify a little bit the idea, that we should maintain three significations of world. Of a world. Like I was speaking of the world of the peasant and things. So let's be more specific about that. A world could be, you could have first a kind of practical meaning to it. And I give the example of a workshop, which is quite good in a way. It is, for instance, imagine a shoemaker or something like that. His world then is his workshop, is where his material is, where he works, where he receives clients, where he receives his suppliers. This is his world. He may be pissed off by his wife or anything, but then when he comes in his workshop, he's happy. Everything is familiar. Everything is around him. And let's say for an artist, the equivalent of that will be a studio. You came in your studio, you have your tubes of paints, and you have your canvases and all that. You have your world, you have your friends, sometimes other artists live nearby. You have your clients who comes and hopefully buy something, and this is the kind of familiar world. So you could define then the world in a very practical term, in a way. Almost as if the relation you have with the object are with touch, more than with eyes. It's not a onlooking relation. It's a looking of manipulation, of using tools and using things. And in that sense, space could be defined in this type of world, in this very familiar world, as the de-distancing of things. It's not that you take distance with things, it's the contrary, that you bring the things to you. It's like a deceiving of space and of distance between around you. And as I tell you, the equivalent of that is certainly for the artist, the studio. Then, second meaning, you have a theoretical space, but in a specific sense. When you speak of the cosmos, when you speak in a very general term of, I would say, a collection of things and people, an endless collection of things and people who are given in the 3 dimension of space, say the depth, the width, and the length, and infinitely prolonging in every time. And in that type of concept, you could say that the touch or the hand is put aside, and it's rather now an onlooking relation that you have with the world. You are looking at the things, and indeed, why I call it theoretical, because in Greek, theoria means a respectful gaze given to things to find their main aspect, to find what the Greek used to call the eidos, the idea, what makes this object what it is. Okay, this is the second meaning, and this you could say, well, maybe it's akin to art also, this kind of theoretical approach, because of the contemplative aspect of it, because there's a lot of looking to things, but it's also close to the scientific approach also to the world, where, again, you have to be objective, you have to look at things, and you have to see what it is. And finally, there's a third meaning, which could be defined as a kind of spiritual world. For instance, when you speak of the Renaissance world or the medieval era world, so you refer to what then? You refer to a certain amount of value, a certain amount of form also eventually, and it can be even applied to a specific painter. You can say the world of Matisse is very different from the world of Picasso, for instance. So each artist could have his own world like this. And then you could say that this type of world, the spiritual world, is not a word used, like the practical one where you use things, you manipulate. It's not a word contemplated either, it's a word created. It's a word done, created by the artist. Sometimes with success, sometimes with less, but certainly the intention is to create a world in which maybe you could share or not. It could be your own very individual, very, I would say, closed world, or you could have more success and be closer to the world of more people, a spiritual world. You have I will illustrate now, 2 strategies about the spiritual world. There's one strategy in which the painter tries to convince you of the illusion he wants to create, of this spiritual world, who is his creation, his invention, and try to, I would say, hide as much as possible the practical world in which he works, indeed, in which, not to make you feel in the painting that he presents in front of you, all the work and all the tricks, I would say even, that he used to create this illusion. And to find it at work, you have to be very attentive to the painting themselves. And I thought of Degas. Maybe it's after all, after that I decide to speak of Degas, I said, oh my God, this is not a very good example to speak of a spiritual world, because Degas is not a very, but let's say in this case I will translate mental world, because he had certain, it doesn't fit in a church or something like that. You have nothing to do with spiritual value understood in that sense. But that he wanted to create a specific world, a world of his own, let's say with ballet dancers and with dancing and all that. So there's no doubt. There's a fascination in Degas on this type of perfection seeking work in women in particular. He have done it with Les Repasseuses and he's always fascinated by type of work in which you have to be really in control of your gesture. And of course, dance is one example of that. But it's also a kind of forbidden world. You know that not everybody was allowed to visit ballet dancer when they were practicing, like what you see here. You needed to have a carte de visite and sometimes to entertain one of these ladies. And it was a kind of closed world. It was not so easy to do. So in a way, you could say he wants to reveal to us also a world which is forbidden, which is not really easy of access. When you compare the two paintings, who have almost the same title, one is called Examen de danse, and l'autre Classe de danse. One is at the Metropolitan and the other is at d'Orsay, so they are in good museum, both of them. And when you compare them, you have the impression at first that it's exactly the same subject matters, exactly the same painting. You see here the master of ballet, Monsieur Jules Perrault, we know his name. He's an old guy, he did that for all his life with his stick. And it's an examen dance, so you have a ballerina in front of him making an arabesque or a few steps, and he's supposed to give notes, to give marks to the girls. And indeed, the other girls are absolutely not attentive to what's happening. They are finished their tour, or they are waiting for it, and each one is busy with herself in his own world, if you want, and have nothing to do with the poor girl here who's in front of this bastardo on the other side. But anyway, so at first sight, the two paintings look alike. When you look more carefully, you will see little differences. For instance, the group in the front here are not exactly the same in the two paintings. In this one, you have these two dancers here, who seems to be the mirror image one of the other. As if the guy have used, you see the drawing of one girl, and then its reflection in the mirror to make another one. Then you have also maybe three dancers here that are very difficult to see their faces out there, except maybe the first one here. And then finally, you have one there who seems to float in midair. She's a little bit too high if you look at the piano here. And then when you become to notice this thing, you understand that this is done from many sketches of different taken in different time and assembled by Degas to make you the illusion that we are now seeing a thing that really happens in a moment only in time. Then if you compare the background, you will see this girl here have disappeared in the other painting. So all these little differences I can live with without too much difficulty. But where I'm more troubled, it is by the decor. It is apparently the same room, the same place, but if you compare both of them, you will see there's a lot of difference between them. For instance, here there's a big mirror on the wall, and here it's a wall. It's not a mirror. It's with kind of pilaster on each side. It's a door opening on another room that we see only through reflection, and we see through this aperture here some windows giving on the outside. So here the walls are completely bare. There you have all these decorations. Look here, for instance, you have a kind of poster on the wall that, by the way, is announcing William Tell of Rossini. This is an opera that was that. The poster is here also, but it's not at the same place. They have moved a little bit. And finally, the most striking aspect, because this will take a lot of carpentry to do, the plank here are horizontal and there they are vertical. And then I see the question not to ask is to ask which is the right one. Both are good. Both are from the imagination of Degas, and it doesn't matter what it is really in fact. And then when you look carefully at Degas painting, you see the work, you see the studio behind. But he hid it perfectly, because if you saw it too much, it will break the illusion. You will get out of the world that he wants to create. You will go back or to a kind of very theoretical work, like an art historian analyzing the picture in details, or a very practical one. If you are an artist, you will know how he built it. He took one sketch from there and assembled them and play with all the combination possible. And indeed, there's very few allusion. For instance, I was asking myself, do we have photo of Degas painting? Most of the photo we have of Degas are like the one on your left, like this one. Here is the Zoe. Here is the housekeeper of the. You know, Degas was a bachelor, misogyne aussi, anti-Dreyfus. He's an horrible man, so there's no doubt. And so he was almost blind also at the time, and she's reading newspaper to him, and that's a photo. Here is, to my knowledge, the only photo we know of Degas painting in his studio. But is it not strange that you don't see the picture on which he works, and you see him not with tools in his hand, but just looking intensely to what he did? So even in this rare picture in which he's seen as working in a way, because he have a kind of smock, he's not dressed properly, even then you don't see him really working. Degas is a painter who tried to hide this link with the familiar world of the studio. Another, maybe the only example that we have of him being represented as a painter is the self-portrait. Very young at the time, it's 1855, and he holds in his hand a little instrument that painter at the time used to hold charcoal. It's a charcoal holder, and that's why you have this kind of gesture like that. But he's dressed very properly. He's dressed with the bourgeois black suit, with the bow tie and all this. He leans maybe very preciously on a little cartable there with drawings, but that's it. So even then, he suggests that he's not really a painter, he's just a dessinateur, just a drawer. He's not really going too far in this. And I tell you, this is very exceptional in Degas, because most of the self-portraits of Degas are, for instance, Degas saluant. He's with a hat like this, he's with his friend, and he never suggests that he's a painter. So this is one of the strategies to create this kind of spiritual world, or let's say mental world in the case of Degas. You take distance from the studio, you take distance from whatever could suggest the work from which you come from. The other strategy I want to illustrate with a painting by a Canadian painter that I like very much, Ozias Leduc. And it's a strange picture to start with, because it's called the phrenology. Yeah? And indeed, it's written even on the painting here. You have this kind of bust in plaster, who is very cold. And if you notice on the forehead and on the skull there, you have little areas who are marked and with numbers. And phrenologia, if I understand well what it was a kind of freak medicine, I don't know what. Well, the phrenologists were touching the skull, and were discovering little bumps and little holes, and not too many holes, I hope, but little bumps in which you could predict then your talents. For instance, I don't know if you have this in English, but we say in French, il a la bosse de la mathématique. You have a little hump like this that at the right place, of course, that shows that he will be a mathematician or he will be something else. So mothers came to the phrenologist to know what to do with their terrible kids, you see, how to behave with them and all this, and he was advising them. It was, in fact, this kind of a prediction of what will be more accurate in a way when we will deal with the brain and not with the skull. Indeed, in the brain you have areas that correspond to certain, not talent, but certain faculties, let's say, but not in the skull. But it was like predicting that. Anyway, it was immensely popular, and I think for Leduc, he was interested by that, because in a way, if you think of it, it's a little bit like painting. So you use something material to suggest something spiritual. You use the conformation of the skull to define a character or a temperament or even a soul, if you want. And for him, this was exactly what painting was about. Painting is material, it's, you use paint and all that, but you suggest a spirit, you suggest something more profound. And I think that's what attracted him. And in a way, it gives meaning to all the details of the painting. And you see, for instance, here on the left, you have the drawings instrument of the painter. A compass and a kind of a holder of, not of charcoal, but of, let's say, of chalk, and you have an eraser, and then all the things that you need to draw. On the other side, you have paint tubes. And even in the glass, enfin, you have the brushes, and even here, but it's difficult to see in a reproduction, you have a kind of moire effect, as if the light go through the water there and create a little rainbow of all the colors. So you could say you have material colors here, and then you have a more optical one on the top there. And then you understand, if you see the relation between these three things, in a way, what he's telling us at the foreground, with this object here and there, this is painting as craftsmanship. As a métier, as something that you have to know. But I would say almost with your hands. This is more intellectual in a way. This is what painting is all about, to create, let's say, spiritual content with material things. And indeed, the phrenologic bust here is placed on a treatise of anatomy. You can read atomy here, so as if anatomy is written there. So I would say then it's painting as science. Painting is not only craftsmanship, but it's also knowledge, it's also science. And finally, in the background here, you have another painting, like a painting in a painting. And for many years, we were absolutely at loss with this painting, and it's this wonderful erudite Michael Pantazzi that finally find what it was. Pantazzi works for the National Gallery since years and years. I know him each time we go and we speak and all that. He's always like this guy. Says, you don't know, Gagnon, so what I just found. The painting in the Ossias-le-Duc is by William Frost, and it's called Sabrina. So he said, thank you very much, but I'm not much more clear about what it is, because who cares of William Frost? I never heard of this guy. And it seems to be a very obscure painter of the end of 19th century, an English painter. And Sabrina, then I looked in my dictionary, it is the Latin word for the Severn, this river that you have in England. And indeed, it's a kind of allegorical representation of the river, like a woman is affluent with all, and there's 8 of them, and indeed, the Severn apparently have 8 affluents. And Le Duc had a little reproduction of this painting in his studio and liked it, and he put it there. But then you could say it's a third meaning of painting, painting as inspiration, painting as craftsmanship, as science, and finally as inspiration. And even the drawing on the foreground here seems to be like a Corot or something, and are dealing also with water, but in a different way, more like more realistically, if you want. And so you have an allegory and you have a more realistic presentation. So then I said the strategy is different from the guy. Here you are in the studio of the artist, but he used all the object that is very familiar to him to suggest a reflection of much more, a much bigger dimension, a reflection on painting itself. And so you have these two possibilities. For getting to real abstract, okay, now I think I try to explain what will be to create a spiritual world, if you want, for an artist. To make the spiritual world really abstract, you need something else. You need also to index in a certain way the spirituality that you are about, that you want to speak about. And this, of course, is less evident. Let's see, two things can happen. You can have works of art that are suddenly deprived of their world. I like, for instance, the totem pole who is photographed in a museum and come from the same context that you have in the painting of Emily Carr on your right. meaning the Kwakiutl people. And when you put this totem pole in the museum, you withdraw the world from it. Because then the only relation I can have with it, it is aesthetical. Is it theoretical, in fact? I find it interesting, primitive, I could call it whatever name I have, but it doesn't belong to my world. When, in the contrary, like Emily Carr represented, is in function, with people around and in front of a big house and with all the symbols that are clear for these people, then you could say not only it expresses a world, but it almost creates it also. And in the fascination of the abstract painter will be there. It says, how can we also create a world that will manifest in a certain way the spirit? The problem it is when you see primitive art, or so-called primitive art, I'm sorry, I have to put big brackets there. When you see this type of art, or let's say of the First Nation, you feel that it's traditional in the sense. We don't understand it because we don't belong to the same tradition, or some of their people don't understand it anymore because they lost this tradition. But the moment you get inside of it, this is clear, this is speak to you. And the adventure of the modern artist is very often, in the contrary, much more solitary than that. They create their spiritual world, they try to index the spirit in the façon that they will represent it, but maybe with the risk of being less understood and being further from, let's say, a public that can share the same type of values. So the way to I want to go back. No, this it's okay, and this I don't want to see too often. I'm coming to Harris now. For Harris, after this long, but I says I want to make an introduction, a general introduction to the whole series, so you have to bear with me. With Harris, the problem will be complicated because, as a member of the group of 7, it will be, to start with, very much rooted in a place. Because these 7s wanted to make a national art. They wanted to make something that represent Canada and represent Canadian values. And certainly, at the beginning, Harris is completely with this. And I show you one of his famous pictures called Isolation Peak. And maybe a little bit simplified, but there's no doubt that what you want to represent is one of the mountain of the Rockies, and with all majesty and with this black sky behind and this effect of contrast with light and all this. There's no doubt that he starts from that. So there must be a factor that have brought him toward a more universal type of approach, in which precisely what he wanted to do is to convey a more spiritual meaning than just to represent some aspect of the environment. And this factor will be theosophy. Theosophy is not much my cup of tea, but little I understand about this, it is let's say, kind of very universal type of thought. They are looking for an evolution of the mind, of the spirit, and with a lot of intervention of some Oriental philosophy concept. It was created at the end of the 19th century by a lady who's called Madame Blavatsky, strange author. She have a lot of a little bit oddball on the side. She used to say that it's not men who descend from monkeys, but it's the opposite. The monkeys are bad men who have been reincarnated, you know, in monkeys. So watch out. And she was against Darwin and things like that. She had ideas. Anyway, but in Canada, you had a theosophist movement. You have also even a publication, the Canadian Theosophist, was a magazine, was published, in which Harris wrote, at few occasions, a lengthy piece in which, you see, he was certainly very attached to that. He was very interested to that. And what was the importance of this theosophic belief? It is in theosophy that he understood the possibility of translating, of indexing what I call the spiritual value through a means that will speak to a painter. And this means was geometry. And that's why I wanted to show you in parallel a Mondrian picture, because Mondrian also, the one you see on the right there, Mondrian was also interested by theosophy. Mondrian was not a big reader. I was told that he had 3 books in his library, which is not much. And among these 3, there was 2 issues of the same books. So even less. But the book that he had in 2 copies by a man called Shoemaker was a theosophist, and in which he have it's called The New Image of the World, and in which he have this theory of horizontal and vertical associated with spirituality, horizontal with materiality. Also, of course, unfortunately, man is vertical, as you know, and women are horizontal. Anyway, there was a lot of these kind of mishmash ideas like this, and I don't know if Mondrian was very interested in that, but again, the solution always suggested by this trend of thought, it is that if you want to convey spiritual meaning, nothing like geometric form. In a way, what there is suggesting there, it is material form are not geometric, are a little bit like in the painting of Kandinsky on the side there. Kandinsky joined a little bit the same type of idea by another mean. For Kandinsky, the main experience, it is the destruction of the object. When you don't have any more object, when you don't have anything that you can call a pot, a glass, or something like that, when it's just form or just color, then you could have abstraction. So it's another way toward the same idea, kind of distancing from the real world. But geometry seems to be fantastic, because if you think of it, material world is not geometric. Or maybe now we have fractal theory in which we could describe the whole world as it is, but let's say not Euclidean geometry. The world is not Euclidean. And to convey the idea of the contrary of matter, well, you take geometry as a good symbol of the spirit, of what is spiritual. And I'm not surprised that this appeared at the time. You have a lot of critique on our modern world among the painters. They are conscious of that, in which, for instance, you oppose power prevails on justice, war prevails on peace. After all, they had the First World War just before these paintings were painted. And then you have a second one after, and we are still in it. You have this idea of we should save even the most corrupted regime at any cost for the sake of stability, instead of some adventure, some change. Disinformation instead of truth. So all these critiques that you can make of the modern world, you could want to find something else who will be better, who will change. And I guess this was part of Harris' preoccupation and of Mondrian, of Kandinsky. After all, Kandinsky wrote a book, it's called Le Spirituel dans l'art. I read it in French, but I guess spiritual in art, spirituality in art or something. And so they are looking for something else. And maybe for Harris, theosophy was the answer. Of course, these answers could be an evasion from reality, because these problems that I was evoking, truth against disinformation, war and peace, are political problems. And apparently it's not theosophy that will solve that. You could see it as a kind of evasion from reality. But it's at least trying to find an answer. For these people, the real answer is not political, it's spiritual. And in that sense, the evolution of Harris is very classical in a way, very close to the first pioneers of abstract art. They start also with figuration, go toward abstract art, and very often, they have the same influence of theosophy, of this love of geometry, or, like in Kandinsky, the destruction of the object. Okay, now I want to illustrate this by painting by Harris, because it's about time to speak of him. Where is he? The first painting, Mountain Experience, this is the sketch that prepare a painting that will show. I wanted to show you in parallel, but I realized it's just after. As you can see at the beginning, Harris starts from nature, from something that he could see. You do read without problem, let's see the shape of mountain here, even clouds there, and even this big triangle could be still understood like a mountain. But there is in front of this a kind of contraption here who seems to be more irrealistic. In the finished painting, you have the same element more or less, but much more detached from the experience, the direct experience of the mountain. For instance, here, what was clearly mountain shape becomes more abstract shape, like just circle like this. And of course, indeed, the unity of the picture is stronger now than in the sketch, as if you have better organized its element. You must realize this is not a geometrized landscape. It is geometric, but it is created as such from imagination in a way. It's not just to transpose geometrically form that you can see, not just to transform every mountain in a triangle. It is to use some of the shape that you find in nature, but then to create other shape. And for instance, this big arch of light here seems to have another source. Harris was interested in a book called Thought Forms by two authors, by Annie Besant, B-S-S-A-N-T, and Lee Batter, L-E-A-D-B-A-T-E-R, two spiritualists who were also proposing the idea that we could represent, with abstract shape, of course, some of the human thought, how the thinking function. And one of this form, of course, is kind of ray of light, it's kind of a round shape like this, with almost a symbol of totality, if you want. And this interest, okay, you see the problem. It is not only that you want to create a spiritual world, but you want also to suggest something of the spirit. And the problem it is how you do it. Where do you find your tools? Which kind of image you will use for that? And as I suggest, this kind of strict geometry could be the solution. Look, for instance, in this painting that I put in parallel with another one. It's the one on the left. It's called Abstraction Number 3, and it's of 1937. The previous one, Mountain Experience, was 1936. So you see, about the same time. I could say that the work of Harris becomes to look more and more abstract from the middle of the 30s to the end. And it's part of his work is less known in a way, because we're more used to the painting with landscape and especially one to have been sold for, I don't know, $2.5 million recently. So everybody knows about Harris because of that painting. But when you think of him, of his own career, I would say abstract art have occupied him a long time. He died in 70. You have all this period where he was doing only abstraction. And in the group of 7, he's special on that. He's the only one really who did it so extensively. You do have few examples in McDonald, for instance, of abstract painting, but never as consistently as Harris did. So abstraction number 3, and the other one, unfortunately, I have just a black and white reproduction, but the two paintings are so akin, in a way, so close one to the other, that it can work. It's called Poise, the other one. And of course, the title is give us a little bit more a clue of what it is than abstraction number 3. At first sight, okay, it's a kind of landscape again, maybe a marine, in which you see an horizon, a sky here, and an horizon, and here a kind of theater on which it's opening on this landscape, maybe a kind of baroque or very extravagant type of window. And then always in the two paintings, this kind of sphere within I would say not in the exact geometrical center of the painting, but certainly in a kind of visual center of the painting. So you are attracted by the sphere right away. And you could see it a little bit like the ego, like the I, you see, and with the world around it, as if it is the subject, it is the human being that create the world in a way. It is because we look at that it exists in certain way, to take an expression of Berkeley, esse es percipi, to be, it's to be perceived. If you are not perceived, you don't exist. And in a way, this kind of sphere could be like the ego in the middle of a huge empty space like this, and creating it in a way that will make sense with this kind of window here, like if we were withdrawing curtains, you see, to really reveal the world. And this, it's not, be careful, it's not illustration of theosophic idea. On this, Aris was very, very conscious of the danger of that. If you just illustrate ideas, you are not a painter, because then why to do it? You see, just write about your ideas. You don't have to paint them. But he says that you see it in his correspondence, even with Emily Carr, for instance. He said theosophy gave us a lot of ideas to work on, but we should not be slave of them. We should not be just trying to illustrate them. We should create our own world with form, with colors, and with shapes, but not just to illustrate it. This is why probably others' interpretations are possible. You could see in one way or the other, it's not too important. Finally, it's always trying to make a strong image that will finally reach most people possible, but and will be until will get some meaning. Here, this picture, I have difficulty to speak of it because it should be presented two ways. It's called only composition, 1938, but if you go like this a little bit, if you imagine that it's vertical instead of horizontal, you could see, let's see, if you put it like this and you put it vertically like that, these two spheres here and this kind of shape there could be seen as a shoulder in a way and a head. And you could see then it could look like a window with two people looking toward the sky there. No? Or sometimes at the end of a lecture like this, I see kind of doubt in the audience, and I begin to feel maybe I'm turning sick slowly, you know, begin to see things. So I try to check like this. Do you see it also? Well, but especially with abstract art, it could be a problem. But so indeed, in a way, when you get a painting like this, when the artist is dead and you don't know exactly how you put it, this is a possibility. If you put it horizontally, like it seems, it's Denis Reed who told me that. He says, no, it's certainly horizontal. He says, I checked the faux cadre, the frame on which the canvas is organized. And the holes of the nails that keep the canvas make it more horizontally than vertically. And then, of course, if you put it like this horizontally, it looks like a kind of simplified landscape, because then this sphere that you have there, with all the ray of blue and going toward a lighter and lighter blue around, becomes like the sun irradiating, let's say, light around. And this becomes like a kind of slanted type of horizon in which you see maybe hills and things like a very simplified landscape. And I make the rapprochement with this famous painting. It's called Riven Hearth, #1, that was done in 1936, because you do have also this idea of a sphere cut by a plane, by a yellow plane, like you have here. Let's say these two yellow planes here and the sphere, who could be seen also as cut, as if he was dealing again. And this, of course, is certainly derivative from a landscape. You have almost a shape of mountain in the back, and the title Riven Hearth, the hearth who have been destroyed or being sliced in two, if you want, suggests also a kind of cosmic landscape. And so it's always this type of going from some element of nature, transforming them in geometric shape, and trying to create a kind of world of its own. This one have a double title, and it's interesting again because it's not, you have to be careful not to reduce it just as a play of sphere and triangles and squares. There's geometry, but there's something else also. This one is called geometrical abstraction, so indeed, it's what it is called, but in bracket transatlantic, as if it was a boat, or it was something, the shape that you get there are from the, let's say, the Titanic, I don't know which boat, but anyway, it comes from also something mechanical, something that has some relation with machine. And you remember at the beginning, I was speaking of the technique, of the danger of technique. Technique, of course, use a lot of geometrical form. Any technology are always with geometric form. And abstract painters are not too deterred by machine. In the contrary, very often they feel akin with this world, because the machine world, in a way, is spiritual, is detached from the natural world. You could say, yes, it's so detached that it destroys it. But in a way, it's also an affirmation of the spirit. And it's not astonishing that they are attracted by this type of shape, and here that they suggest even maybe the shape of a boat. This is a very, very successful type of abstraction of Harris. It's called abstraction number 7, and I show you in parallel, only unfortunately in black and white, but at least it's good, a sketch, a preparatory sketch of the painting that is there. Abstraction number 7 is of 1939, and it's at the Vancouver Art Gallery. And if you look at the sketch, you see that at the beginning there was again these mountain shape here that were giving like a certain weight to the bottom of the painting, in which you can have all the other elements stabilized by these shape of mountain there. And then you have this kind of peak here, a little bit like in the painting I was showing at the beginning, the isolation peak, with this curve here, which suggests maybe some high wind in the atmosphere, or like clouds. So the sketch is rather realistic in a way, quite empty on the right side, as if he's interested mainly on the left side. And when you see it in the finished painting, the first thing that strikes you, it is that these elements here are completely geometrized. They become just a kind of a jigsaw kind of shape, and prolongated here by a long curve going up there, and in a way detaching completely this triangle from the base that he have in the sketch. Now it's floating in midair in a way, without any attachment, nor to the, I would say, to the frame of the picture, and nor to any subject matter in a way. It's like a triangle. And then the circle here, where more realistic here, becomes really just a suggestion of movement, and maybe a circle that recalls the other circle that you see here, a kind of balancing act between those two. And then finally, the left part here is much more dynamic than in the sketch. You have a kind of white vector here that create a movement, and an opposition, of course, between dark and clear and light, that make it certainly much more dynamic than in the sketch. And you see again, it's not just a geometrization of landscape. It chooses in the landscape certain elements, eliminate others, and create suddenly a painting that all by itself. And that for him will represent more the let's see, the spiritual content. Here in this painting, it's called Involvement. We have the possibility to analyze it a little bit more closely, because we have the sketch, the preparatory sketch. There's 3 of them that I will show you in parallel. So the painting is called Involvement, and it's 1939, and the little studies, of course, are the same area. And the first thing that is striking in the studies here, it is the intervention of a grid. As you know, the grid is it's very simply just vertical lines and horizontal one to create a kind of skeleton or a kind of structure in which you will build your image. And the grid also have the tendency to create very flat space. Because if you divide your painting like this with a grid, every square have the same strength, if you want, and if you fill them with color, well, you organize it as a kind of surface, and it goes toward more bidimensionality in a way. So this intervention here, it comes from, again, these are a reading that Harris did of a concept that he got. Especially, you know, at a certain point of his life, I think it's 1939, he moved in Santa Fe, and in southwest of United States, not far from Teos. Teos is famous for one great American painter, is Georgia O'Keeffe, as you know. And there was a lot of these transcendental painters, kind of guys who looks at the, I guess in this type of landscape you become mystic or crazy, and sometimes both. But because it's very empty, very hot, and all this. And so there was a group of painters that was called the Transcendental Painting Group. I can give you their names, but they're absolutely unknown guys. I have no idea who they are and how they paint and all that. But again, this type of name, let's say, they give themselves, and they have this idea of a dynamic symmetry. Symmetry could be very static, but habitually it gives also a very good composition. Symmetric composition is very pleasant. Let's say it's something that you refer to easily. But to make it dynamic, you have to introduce, according to them, a certain disorder, if you want, a certain distance from pure symmetry. And if you look here in the drawing, you do have these triangle here who are on each side of the main axis here, who are in a way symmetric. They are repeated there. But in the final painting, Harris took pain, let's say, to break this too rigid type of symmetry. You have the two triangles, but they are not one in front of the other. You have one here without any correspondence on the other side. So he tried to introduce this kind of dissymmetric element to make it more lively, more living. Second sketch, you will see that he works again on a certain detail. The thing that doesn't change is the main axis here. This motif here. Okay, the circle there could change. It could have this kind of a suggestion even of, I would say, a kind of hill there or something. But the main motif doesn't change. And finally, the third one, you find it again as it is, but again with other variation and more dissymmetry beginning to enter there. The feeling I have about Dennis Reed wrote about this painting, saying for him it looks like a giant flower, which in a way you could see it as a kind of a vertical axis here and blooming on the top here. My feeling it is that it's an autoportrait, it's a self-portrait it's a narcissistic picture. If you bear with me, you could see it as a forehead, very long nose, eyes, and let's say a chin or something. It's, of course, a concentrated portrait. It's somebody who's looking down. He's not foolish. He's not fooling around. He's very concentrated. And the reason why I say that, it is because you do have a possibility of a certain, when you make an abstract portrait, how do you do that? The only possibility is through caricature, where you simplified the traits of the face in such a way that you find circle, lines, triangle, or something like that. If you are too realistic, of course, you will never get this kind of more spiritual thing. But caricature could be the solution. And it was certainly understood by the Cubists when, for instance, Picasso and Braque tried to do some portrait in a Cubist manner. They went through caricature to present a minimum of resemblance of the sitter. Here is the portrait of Daniel Henrik Kahnweiler, you know, the famous merchant that bought a German merchant that was living in Paris, but bought very early the Picassos and Braque and things, and was clever enough to know that this is good stuff. So they make his portrait, and they make the portrait of Ambroise Vollard and all the merchants that were around them. And in a way, they use also this device of simplifying and caricature. And indeed, if we want to see a giant flower in the painting of Harris, I would prefer to attach this to this painting here, in which you have one circle on the top, maybe a kind of a side branch here, and again, this vertical, the two ideas of verticality, like an ascension and blooming at the top. Then again, you don't need too much imagination to translate that in more theosophic meaning, as if the progression, the ascension of spirituality bring épanouissement, bring blooming with time. This one on the right, it's called Abstract Vertical, and it's of 1939 too. Maybe I can go a little bit faster on this. I think this is a kind of variation of the same theme. The three circles that you had before now are in the middle or in the top, and it looks more like a face, if you want, especially if you understand the third circle as a third eye. For the spiritualists also, there's always this idea of the eyes, physical one that we have are looking at matter, but we have a kind of spiritual eye that could be more intuitive and looks at the real reality. But it is based on the same idea, and also it's a good example of a kind of a dynamic symmetry. It's very symmetrical at first sight, but when you look at it carefully, you will see there's a lot of little change from one side to the other to make it more dynamic, more. Because one of the problems that you have with geometry is that, okay, maybe you suggest the spiritual life, but you go far from life. And this is a polarity that can be seen as dangerous, especially Harris will want to react against that at a certain point. Try to get toward form who are more lifelike and less geometrical, because if spirituality is a real force, is something, it has to be also living and cannot be dead. Cannot be dead. Yeah, this is again a very beautiful painting number 4 of, again, 39. It seems to be very important here. Where Harris introduced another element, the element of transparency. When you follow, for instance, this blue plane that you have here, and you arrive in this region, you see this dark blue one like being seen through the plane. Here it looks very solid, almost metallic, and suddenly it transforms itself almost as glass. What transparency do in a painting, it is to derealize the form. And it's not astonishing that he's interested by that, to derealize form. And on the other hand, also, it creates an ambiguity in the reading in space. When you have two planes, one above the other, there's no problem, because if they are superposed like this, you read the one which is behind, like further back in the depth, in the background of the painting. But if they are transparent, it's more, you hesitate a little bit more. You create a more ambiguity in the reading of it. And again, this process of derealization is not astonishing. On the other hand, you see these circles there, they really popped in front of us. They are not transparent, they impose themselves, these three circles here, above the other surface and are brought toward us. The transparency, anyway, I wanted to give you an idea of this. This is, I think this is the beginning of the introduction of a new kind of space, of form here. Up to now, you see a very rigid type of geometrical form. In this composition number 2 of 1941, at first sight, you say, oh, look at these clouds or something, as if you had, and indeed, when you compare it to the sketch, you see that it's very close then to nature. And even the sketch, we know what it is. It is a specific mountain. It's called Mont Anne Alice. And it's done also in 41, so it's the preparatory sketch of the painting. In the painting, the presence of the mountain is disappear. But what he kept, it is more this type of form, closer to more biomorphic, meaning more like the form of life. And this will be more and more important in the other part of Harris' production. He called it, again, mountain experience, this one. But if you don't have the sketch nearby, it's difficult to see how it relates to a mountain experience. But the moment you get it, you understand it. But I think what's more important, it is these cloud shapes that are introduced here to create more lifelike life. And then suddenly you have a breakthrough with this type of painting in which the geometry seems to be much less important, and in which you have this kind of almost Art Nouveau type of shape. It's called simply Painting of 1948. And as if now Harris decided to not to leave only to geometry the function of translating spirit, but also getting to more form, closer to form of life. And it's much more free. And then you have a whole series of those paintings that develop this idea. Like in this one, it's called Formative 3, but formative probably in the sense that as if you were at the, that you witnessed the formation of the world. It starts like a kind of chaos, and slowly it will get organized, and it will create a more definitive form. Formative 3. You have, this is northern image of 52, which is, again, with this same type of shapes, but with the opposition between dark and light, and this kind of aura around what it is, maybe a suggestion of the sea also. It's kind of an apparition like that of the creation of the world. Ritual dance in spring. So really Harris seems to be, and he's 70 years old when he painted these things, as if he was suddenly finding a new youth. And it was exhibited as such, and very surprised for the public to look. There is some picture that still stick to the idea of theosophy, like this one, who have a very complicated title. It's called Atma, Buddhi, and Manas. And these words, of course, come from Indian philosophy. And it seems to be 3 levels of awareness that you have in theosophy. So the lower one, Manas, who is represented by earth color here, will be the intellectual power. You see, will be whatever you can know through your intelligence and through knowledge. The second level, Buddhi, is already much more spiritual than that, the one in the middle, and that's why he painted it more in light yellow. Or then it will be more like what meditation could achieve, instead of just knowledge, of intellectual knowledge, but meditation. And finally, Atma. Atma is the name of God for the Hindu pantheon, so it's a more Godhead, would say, level, I would say. And finally, and so even in this painting of 1962, he remains attached to this idea and even make almost an illustration of them. The very last painting of Harris, meaning of 64, 68, are not were found in his studio and are given just letters as name. So this one is called Abstraction K, and it's as if now the only thing that matters to him is light. And you have so this ray of light with this vibration also with the yellow and white, and in the background maybe the sea, maybe the sky, it's not important. My picture is a little bit cropped because you do have here a line of horizon in the bottom of the picture, but on the photo here it has been cropped. But you do have a minimum of landscape, really just a line to show that this is like the sun getting like this. And the very last one that he probably painted, that was left in his studio, is this one. It's almost like a child drawing in a way. And it's an untitled abstraction named P, because they just gave letters to them, 68. And as you know, Lawren Harris died on January 29, 1970 in Vancouver. And these last works are devoted to light, in fact. Just as if you have all these rays that even suggest a kind of an expansion outside of the frame of the picture into this mysterious world of nothingness that you see around the blue and the violet blue that you have in the bottom. And what strikes me in this series of painting, it is that how coherent it is, how this research of Harris was coherent, and also how daring it was because of his association with the group of 7 to go for so long in that direction was alienating them from all the public that recognized itself in this national art. And this is certainly, you will see, it's a challenge that many of the painters I will deal with have. One who will certainly live something of that kind is Bordeaux. But next time we will speak about Marion Scott, who start from a very, very different point of view. As you know, Marion Scott was much more socially oriented and much more political than Harris could ever be. And so again, the problem is how come that at a certain point in her career, she turned toward real abstraction. Okay, so thank you for your attention, and we'll see you next week.